When a police officer and her canine partner uncover a body buried in a remote Oregon forest, they stumble upon a hidden legacy of government-sanctioned experiments, disappearances, and betrayal. As the investigation grows, allies emerge. An ex-military investigator, a haunted hacker, a rescued teen girl. And together they expose the shadowy remnants of Horizon 1, a Black Ops program targeting the nation's most vulnerable. But some enemies refuse to fade. This is a story about the weight of silence, the cost of truth, and a dog who refused to stop barking until the world listened. What began with one shallow grave becomes a reckoning across the nation, and a question that still echoes. How far would you go to give voice to the voiceless? Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. The forest didn't breathe. That was the first thing Ellie Monroe noticed. Pine Brook, Oregon, nestled among towering Douglas firs and rust-red maples, was used to silence. It was a town born in the hush of trees, raised in the whisper of sawmills, and lulled by the rhythm of rain on cabin rooftops. But this morning, as Officer Monroe eased her cruiser along the gravel trail of Back Hollow Road, the air felt different, still, too still. Even the birds had stopped singing. Ranger, her German Shepherd partner, sat alert in the back seat. His ears twitched, his amber eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he let out a low, guttural growl. Ellie's hand instinctively moved to the grip of her sidearm. "What is it, boy?" Ranger lunged against the mesh divider, barking twice, then whining, a sound she rarely heard from him. She pulled over and stepped out, boots crunching against the damp moss. "Stay close," she said softly. Ranger didn't wait for a command. He leapt from the back and bolted into the undergrowth. Ellie followed, heart pounding beneath her badge. Her fingers brushed the holster as she ducked beneath low branches, swatting at pine needles and spider webs. Then he stopped. Frozen in place, Ranger stood in a small clearing where the forest floor dipped slightly, as if the earth itself had recoiled. He sniffed once, twice, then began to dig, fast, frantic, throwing clumps of black soil behind him like a dog possessed. "Ranger, stop!" Ellie's voice was sharp, but he didn't listen. His bark changed, no longer alert, desperate. The moment she reached him, the smell hit her. It was faint but unmistakable. Death, not fresh, long settled. The wind shifted slightly, and something metallic flashed among the disturbed earth. Her blood ran cold. She dropped to her knees beside him, pulling her gloves on as the first edge of fabric emerged. It was floral, a piece of clothing, torn, faded. She reached into her pocket for her radio with trembling fingers. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need immediate backup at Back Hollow Road near mile marker 9, possible 10 to 65. A code for a found body. And send the coroner." The silence answered her. No birds, no wind. Just Ranger's soft whimper as he backed away, tail low. Ellie stared at the exposed cloth and knew this wasn't just some buried animal or forgotten hunter's trash. This was a grave. Hours later, the area was flooded with yellow tape, flashing lights, and the grim procession of forensics. Sheriff Palmer arrived with his usual slow gait and grimace, arms crossed, the weight of experience pressing heavy on his shoulders. "You sure about this?" he asked. Ellie pointed. "Dog found it. Wouldn't move until I got here." The coroner uncovered the body just before dusk. A young woman, maybe 17 or 18, wrists bound, face turned to the side as if she'd been looking for a way out even after death. Ellie didn't realize she was holding her breath until Ranger nudged her thigh, grounding her in the moment. "She matches the description of Emma Winslow," one of the deputies said. "Been missing a year and 3 months." Emma. Ellie remembered the name. The posters on telephone poles, the mother's teary pleas on local news. The case that had gone cold after just 2 weeks, but there was something else. The body wasn't alone. As the coroner lifted the remains, a glint of metal caught the light. A medallion partially buried, tarnished but intact, about the size of a silver dollar. Not military, not religious. She picked it up with tweezers. "Got something," she said. Sheriff Palmer leaned in. "What the hell is that?" It was circular, etched with an emblem she didn't recognize, a triangle within a circle, surrounding a smaller symbol like a rising sun. But it wasn't beautiful. It felt wrong, cold. "I've never seen anything like it," Ellie murmured. "Could be a gang thing," the sheriff offered, unconvinced, "or one of those internet cults." But Ellie wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes were locked on the girl's hands, bruised and broken, fingers curled, as if they'd tried to claw their way out. And Ranger, ever silent, sat beside the edge of the grave, tail flat, gaze fixed on the trees, as if watching for someone or something. They worked until nightfall. By the time the body was bagged and the site logged, the forest had reclaimed its stillness. But Ellie's mind raced. Emma Winslow was supposed to be another tragic runaway, lost to time and bad luck. But this was something else. There were signs of torture, a medallion buried like an offering. It wasn't random. Someone had placed her here carefully. Back at the station, Ellie stayed long after everyone had left. She cleaned her boots mechanically, staring at the medallion on her desk under a desk lamp. Her laptop was open, tabs multiplying, searches for symbols, missing persons cases, local cults. Nothing matched. She didn't hear the knock until it came again. Louder. Sheriff Palmer stepped in. "Go home, Monroe." "I will," she lied. He stared at her a moment, then softened. "We'll get the bastard who did this." But she saw the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe it. Maybe he'd seen too much. Maybe he'd already given up. After he left, Ellie sat in the silence again. Just her and Ranger. She turned the medallion in her hand one last time and whispered, "What are you?" Ranger whimpered and walked to the door. The clock read 2:17 a.m. The town slept. But Ellie couldn't. In Pine Brook, the trees whispered secrets to each other under the windless sky. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of headlights and handcuffs, someone knew exactly what that medallion meant, and they'd be watching to see who found out. The forest gave her no answers, only more questions. By morning, the gravesite at Back Hollow was sealed off with temporary fencing, guarded by 2 sleepy deputies sipping from plastic thermoses. Mist curled low between the trees, like restless spirits reluctant to rise. Ellie parked her cruiser just outside the tape, stepping out with Ranger at her heel. Her boots sank slightly into the wet soil as she crossed into the clearing again. There was no blood, no sound, no sense of finality, just an emptiness that made the air feel heavier than it should. The forensics team had packed up hours ago. All that remained was a disturbed patch of forest, a few scattered evidence markers, and a quiet that scraped against her nerves. She walked the perimeter slowly. Ranger sniffed along the edge of the soil, but this time his movements were calm, nose low, tail neutral. The urgency was gone, replaced by a somber quiet, almost reverent. A breeze stirred the trees above. Ellie squatted beside the freshly unearthed pit and let her fingers brush against the edges of the disturbed earth. The girl had been buried shallow. Whoever did this didn't expect her to be found. Or maybe they didn't care. The medallion sat in an evidence bag in her cruiser. But even from memory, the symbol burned behind her eyes. She'd sent photos to a friend at the state office. No answer yet. And every search she'd run came up empty. It wasn't military, religious, or gang-related, according to any existing record. Which made it worse. Unknown symbols meant unknown rules. And unknown rules meant danger. Her phone buzzed. It was Martha Winslow, Emma's mother. Ellie had left her a voicemail the night before. Now the call had been returned. She hesitated, then answered. "Martha, it's Officer Monroe." The voice on the other end was hollow. "You found her, didn't you?" A pause hung between them. "Yes," Ellie said gently, a strangled breath, then sobbing. Ellie stood, walking back toward her vehicle, giving herself space from the quiet forest that somehow made the sorrow more unbearable. She waited as the woman on the other end of the line gathered herself. How did she look?" Ellie swallowed. "It's better if we speak in person." "No," Martha said. "No, I need to know now." Ellie sat in the driver's seat, one hand resting on Ranger's thick fur. She was hurt. There were signs. It wasn't quick. "I'm so sorry." Silence. Then the mother's voice, soft and strange. "I told them. I told everyone it wasn't a runaway. Emma would have never left like that. I told the sheriff. I told the school. No one believed me." "I believe you," Ellie said. "You're the only one who came to my door twice," Martha whispered. "Everyone else just let it die." Ellie clenched her jaw. She remembered that second visit. The first was procedural. The second, weeks later, was instinct, and she'd been told to let it go. "Do you know of anyone who might have wanted to hurt her?" Ellie asked gently. "No," Martha said. She was quiet, loved the woods, drew in her sketchbook for hours. No enemies, no secrets. Except, her voice trailed off. "What?" "There was this one thing. A man, maybe. Emma never said much, but she mentioned seeing someone near the woods, watching." "When was this?" "2 weeks before she disappeared." Ellie's grip on the phone tightened. "Did she say anything else?" "No, just that she didn't want to talk about it, that she'd seen him more than once, always at dusk, just standing there, at the edge of the trees." Ellie's eyes drifted toward the tree line. The mist was rising now, curling around the trunks like fingers. After ending the call, she sat in the cruiser a long time, staring at the bagged medallion in her lap. It had weight to it, not just physical, but historical, like it didn't belong in this place or time. She turned it slowly, watching the strange symbol catch the light. She needed help, not from local departments, from someone who had seen the darker corners of the world. Frank Holloway came to mind. She'd only met him once. Retired Army major turned private investigator. The kind of man who never smiled in photographs and didn't waste words. His reputation had a shadow longer than the pines outside. Some said he hunted war criminals after Bosnia. Others claimed he disappeared for 5 years and came back with scars and stories no one believed. But he knew patterns. He knew what evil looked like before it had a name. She sent him a message, short and blunt. "Need your help. Girl found in shallow grave. Symbol doesn't match anything. You ever heard of Horizon 1? It was a long shot. She didn't expect a response. But 30 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She answered. "Ellie Monroe?" a gravel-rough voice asked. "Yes. You still have the medallion?" "I do. Don't show it to anyone else," the voice said. "I'll be there in 12 hours. The line went dead. She sat back, breath caught in her throat. The name she'd included in her message, Horizon 1, had come up in a single, obscure search the night before. A long-defunct military contractor, the kind of group that operated in the shadows and never left public records. The fact that Frank called her back so fast told her one thing. He knew exactly what it was, and whatever it was, it terrified him. That night she sat on her porch with Ranger at her feet, eyes scanning the woods beyond her fence. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying a scent she couldn't name and a feeling she couldn't shake. She thought of Emma's hands, curled and broken, of the way Ranger had refused to leave, of the man in the trees, silent and watching, and of the medallion, now locked in her desk drawer, still cold as ice. The forest had buried the girl, but it hadn't buried the truth. Not yet. The knock came just after sunrise, 3 firm raps against the wood of her front porch. Ellie hadn't slept. She dozed with her boots on and her service weapon resting on the side table. Ranger was already at the door, tail low, ears sharp. She opened it slowly. The man on the other side was older than she remembered. Frank Holloway stood with a canvas duffel over one shoulder and a folded newspaper in his hand. His hair had gone fully silver, and the lines around his eyes looked carved in. But his presence was the same, solid, serious, like a boulder that refused to be moved. "You're taller than I expected," he said without preamble. "You're not," she replied. He cracked the faintest hint of a smile and stepped inside. The living room was simple, a couch, a coffee table scattered with printouts and notes. Ranger circled Frank once, then settled beside him, unusually calm. "You were military K9, weren't you?" Frank asked, crouching slightly to meet the dog's eyes. Ranger gave a single affirmative bark. Ellie handed him the evidence bag containing the medallion. Frank didn't speak as he turned it over in his hands. His fingers traced the edges, like someone remembering a burn long faded, but never forgotten. "Where'd you find it?" he asked. "Buried with the girl, Emma Winslow. She'd been missing over a year. Ranger found her grave in the pines." He nodded, eyes fixed on the symbol. "They're still using these," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You've seen it before?" "Yeah," he said quietly. "And it doesn't belong here." Frank walked to the table and spread out the newspaper he'd brought. It was dated 10 years ago. The headline read, "Private Contractor Implodes Amid War Crimes Allegations." Ellie scanned the article. The name hit her like a blow. Horizon 1. Frank tapped the photo beneath the headline. A younger version of himself stood in the corner of the image, beside a line of uniformed men. At the center was a clean-cut officer with hollow eyes and a thin smile. "That man," Frank said, "Colonel Vance Drayton, ran covert ops overseas under Horizon 1's budget. You wouldn't find his name in any official record. But those of us who crossed paths with him, none of us forgot. The medallion was their seal, a mark they used to brand their black ops missions. When Horizon 1 collapsed, most of the files vanished. I thought the whole thing was buried." Ellie sat slowly. "So you think this girl, she was killed by them? Horizon 1 doesn't exist anymore." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You don't kill an organization like that. You amputate it, but the pieces learn how to crawl." Ellie let that settle in. The silence between them grew heavy, broken only by the faint creak of pine outside her window. "Tell me everything you know," she said. Frank exhaled slowly, like a man walking back into a nightmare. "I first encountered them in Fallujah. There were whispers of a unit operating independently. They weren't bound by ROE, rules of engagement. They answered to private paychecks, not generals. Horizon 1 was officially a contractor group, but in practice, they were licensed predators. Psychological testing, behavior mapping, trauma control. Their goal wasn't combat. It was human manipulation, torture refined into a science." Ellie felt her throat tighten. "We found a site outside Kandahar, empty cages, hook points in the floor, medical journals with diagrams, the kind of stuff that makes your hands shake, even when they don't anymore." "And you didn't report it?" she asked. "I did. So did a dozen others. We filed it through internal channels. One by one, those reports vanished. Then the people who filed them started retiring, or having accidents, or being discredited." Ellie stood, restless now. She paced the floor, hands on her hips. "Why would they target a girl in Pine Brook, Oregon? This is a town with a population under 9,000. There's nothing here. There's always something," Frank said. "An experiment, a message, or maybe someone talked." She paused. "Talked," he nodded. "Sometimes they go after leaks. If someone within the structure grew a conscience, they'd silence it. And if that someone had a daughter..." Ellie froze. "You think Emma was a message to her own family?" "Or bait," Frank said grimly, "to see who would notice." Ellie's mind jumped back to the day of the discovery, to Ranger's stubborn refusal to move, to the way he had whined, not barked, as if he was mourning. Frank was already flipping open his own laptop. Within seconds, he pulled up a map. "I've been tracking bodies, unofficially. Over the past 8 years, 17 disappearances across 5 states, almost all near remote forests, all cold cases. A few were discovered. Same patterns, torture, no signs of robbery, wrist bindings, all of them missing a vital piece of ID. And guess what?" Ellie leaned in. "In 4 of those cases, I found mention of a small, unknown medallion recovered with the bodies. One was burned, another stolen from evidence." She felt her stomach twist. "So what do we do?" Frank looked at her. "We get ahead of them. We dig before they bury another." Ellie sat back, overwhelmed. Her world had been police reports and stolen bikes, not covert kill squads. Who would even protect something like this, she asked. Frank didn't answer. Instead, he opened a new tab. A list of campaign donors, contracts, appropriations. He highlighted one in particular, Federal Defense Allocation, Covert Domestic Oversight Initiative, $18 million. That's not a real initiative, he said. It's a laundromat. Horizon 1 still has money, which means it has protection. Somewhere up the food chain, someone is feeding it. Ellie looked at the numbers, the cold math of corruption, and felt something deep inside her shift. She stood, walked to her desk, unlocked the drawer. She pulled the medallion from the bag and set it on the table. "I want them," she said. Frank nodded. "Good." Ellie reached for her service weapon, checked the slide, holstered it. "We start where they ended," she said. "We start with Emma." Outside, the wind had picked up. The pines rustled again, whispering warnings to anyone who would listen. But the dead had spoken, and Ellie Monroe was listening. Frank hadn't touched coffee since Kandahar, but he still filled his cup every morning. Ritual mattered. He sat at Ellie's kitchen table with a map stretched out beneath his palms, red pins marking burial sites across the country, silent echoes of vanished lives. His eyes didn't blink often. He read patterns the way some men read scripture, tracing grief like battle scars on a chart of forgotten America. Ellie leaned against the counter, arms crossed. She hadn't gone into the station since the body was found. Sheriff Palmer had called twice. The second time, she didn't answer. "Ranger knows," she said, eyes on the dog curled beside the back door. "He doesn't act the same anymore. It's like something out there got into him." Frank didn't look up. "Dogs remember smells better than people remember pain." "I didn't sign up for this," she said. "You did," he replied. "The day you didn't look away." She didn't argue. Instead, she slid a file across the table, Emma Winslow's autopsy. Frank opened it slowly. Ligature marks, crushed metacarpals, faint scars along the sternum. "Post-mortem markings?" he asked. "Some," she said, "but the bruising was old, weeks old. She was kept somewhere first, then killed." Frank tapped a spot on the map. "There's an old federal forest testing site 30 miles east of here. It was supposed to be decommissioned in '07. Satellite says it's still got power." "Military?" "Not anymore. Probably private, or worse, quasi-private. The place was used for stress tests. High-decibel simulations, sleep deprivation chambers. They called it a resilience training facility. That's government speak for trauma experiments." Ellie leaned closer. "You think she was there?" "I think she was one of many." A chill slid through her spine. She stared at the map, letting the silence speak louder than words. Then she turned. "I'm going." Frank's eyes met hers. Not without eyes in the sky. He pulled out a burner phone, already loaded with encrypted software. "There's a guy I trust, call sign Hawk. He's NSA burnout, lives in a cabin near Crater Lake, hates people, loves firewalls. If anyone can get into Horizon 1's ghost servers, it's him." Ellie nodded. "How long?" "If I call now, he'll cuss for 10 minutes, then drive all night." "Sounds like a friend." "No," Frank said. "He's something better. A man with unfinished business." He stepped outside to make the call. Ellie stayed behind, eyes drifting to the evidence board on the wall. Emma's photo sat in the center. Around her were missing persons, 13 in total, all young, all last seen near wooded areas. It wasn't random, it was organized, practiced. She looked again at Emma's hands, broken fingers, defensive wounds. "She fought," Ellie whispered. Ranger stirred, his ears twitched. That night, the three of them drove east. The federal forest stretched wide and wild, a patchwork of dense pine and abandoned ranger trails. They parked a mile from the old test site and hiked in, moonlight slanting through the trees like searchlights. Ellie walked ahead, flashlight off. Ranger moved beside her, his steps silent, nose twitching. The building rose out of the trees like a wound, concrete, windowless, its edges softened by time but not forgotten. A faded government logo barely clung to the rusted front door. There were no guards, no surveillance, but the hair on Ellie's neck stood up anyway. Frank tested the lock. Still functional, industrial. Too new for a place supposedly abandoned in 2007. "They're still using it," he said. They slipped inside. The interior smelled like mildew and metal. Fluorescent lights flickered above, a few still humming with weak current. The hallway was lined with thick doors, some dented, others sealed with rusted bolts. Ellie's flashlight passed over peeling paint, revealing writing beneath, initials scratched into plaster. Some letters were smeared, as if done in panic. She opened the first door. The room inside was padded, not for safety, for isolation. No window, just a single metal chair bolted to the floor. A chain dangled from the ceiling. She turned to Frank. "What kind of place was this?" He didn't answer. They moved down the hall. Room after room told the same story. Containment, testing, silence. One chamber had soundproofing foam from floor to ceiling. Another had a steel bed frame with wrist restraints worn smooth from struggle. Ellie swallowed bile. And then they found the wall. A mural crudely painted in charcoal or ash. A sun rising over a forest. A girl, arms outstretched, eyes hollow. Beneath her feet, roots twisted into faces, screaming, voiceless. Ellie stepped closer. Ranger let out a low growl. "She was here," Ellie whispered. "Emma?" Frank walked to the opposite side of the wall. Scratched into the paint was a single word. "Still watching." He turned to Ellie. "They didn't kill her right away. They studied her." Ellie's heart pounded. "Why?" "Because Horizon 1 didn't just train soldiers," he said. "They manufactured silence." They left the facility in silence. The air outside tasted wrong, like burnt ozone. Ellie drove back to town in a fog, headlights cutting through a dawn that felt reluctant to arrive. When they returned to her house, Hawk was already there. Tall, rail-thin, his hair tied in a messy bun, wearing a hoodie that hadn't seen a washing machine in years. He was barefoot, sitting on her porch swing, typing on a laptop balanced on his knees. "You owe me whiskey," he said as she approached. "You got in?" Frank asked. "Yeah, but you're not gonna like it." Hawk turned the screen. Ellie's eyes locked on a series of file names. H1 Domestic Optional 4, Field Tests. Oregon Sector Subject Logs. PNW Cluster Evaluation Transcript Emma W. She reached for the mouse, but Hawk stopped her. "I didn't open it," he said. "Not until you're ready. But whatever's in there, it was meant to stay buried." She looked at Frank. He nodded once. "Open it." Hawk clicked. What filled the screen wasn't a report. It was a video. Grainy, time-stamped, a concrete room. A girl strapped to a chair, eyes swollen, mouth moving without sound, as if screaming in silence. Frank reached over and stopped the feed. "No more," Ellie said. Her voice cracked. Ranger whined and lay flat on the floor, as if crushed by something unseen. Ellie stood slowly, walked to her desk, and picked up her badge. She turned it over in her hand, then looked at Frank. "This doesn't go through channels." "No," he said, "it goes through us." She looked out the window at the woods. The war hadn't ended. It had just changed uniform, and somewhere out there, others were still screaming without sound. The town of Pinebrook was waking up to the kind of cold that numbed more than skin. Frost clung to porch rails and power lines like a warning etched in white. Ellie stared out her window, coffee untouched, the edges of her badge still warm in her hand. Ranger sat alert at her feet. He hadn't rested since they returned from the facility, neither had she. Frank stood in the kitchen, speaking low into a burner phone. Hawk was back on the couch, typing like he was trying to outrun something, sweat pooling at the base of his neck despite the cold. Files, names, coordinates, he was building something. Ellie didn't ask what, not yet. The images from the night before still lingered in her mind. Emma strapped to a chair, eyes screaming through silence. Her hands had trembled when the screen went dark, but only for a moment. Now the tremble was gone. It had hardened into something else. "We go public," Ellie said. Her voice cut through the room like a clean break. Frank lowered the phone. "No," she turned to him. "We have a body, a symbol, a facility that's supposed to be decommissioned. A video that should never exist. If we don't speak, we're just as guilty." Frank shook his head. "You don't understand. If we go loud now, they erase everything. including us. Then what do we do, Frank? Her voice rose. Wait until another girl vanishes? No, he said. We bait them. Ellie blinked. What? We control the narrative. We don't hand it over to reporters or agencies who'll be compromised within hours. We leak it, just enough. Make them nervous, make them act. Hawk looked up from his screen. He's right. Horizon One isn't a corporation anymore. It's a system, and systems don't break from the outside. They crack from within. She exhaled. What are you suggesting? We release one image, Frank said. The medallion. We tie it to Emma's case, post it anonymously on the deep web, conspiracy forums, survivor networks, the kinds of places they monitor. Then we wait. Ellie hesitated. And if they come, they will, he said, and that's how we know who they are. An hour later, Hawk was in the back room, rigging a makeshift server. Ellie stood over him, watching as he typed in a caption beneath a grainy photo of the medallion. Found in Pinebrook, tied to missing persons case. We remember. We're watching. He uploaded the file and sat back. Now we count. What? She asked. Pings. Backtraces. Every time someone opens this file, we see where it came from. If Horizon's still watching, they'll look. They'll try to find us. Ellie's fingers tapped against her thigh. She hated waiting. Frank, meanwhile, returned to the maps. We need to anticipate their response. First move will be surveillance. They'll want to confirm the breach. Second move is suppression. That's when people start disappearing. You think they'll come for me? Ellie asked. Frank looked at her. You're a uniform who didn't stay in line. You're the most dangerous kind of problem. They'll want to make an example out of you. Ellie didn't flinch. Let them try. By sundown, the first hit came. Hawk called them into the room. His screen showed a blurred IP address bouncing through dozens of relays before freezing on a location. Quantico, Virginia. Not an agency domain, but close. Someone inside a federal firewall had opened the file. They saw it, Hawk said. More will come, Frank added. An hour later there was a second ping, then a third, and then nothing. Ellie stood by the window, eyes on the street. The silence outside felt wrong. No joggers, no porch lights. Even the wind seemed to avoid the block. She didn't notice Ranger move until his growl rippled low and steady from his chest. He stood, body rigid, gaze fixed on the corner of the yard. Ellie followed his eyes. A black SUV sat half a block down, lights off, engine running. She moved before thinking, grabbing her coat, stepping out onto the porch. The cold slapped her awake. The SUV didn't move. She walked into the street. Frank was behind her in seconds, gun holstered but hand ready. Hawk appeared in the doorway with his laptop under one arm. The SUV remained still, until Ellie was close enough to see the silhouette of a man behind the wheel. He lifted a camera, snapped a photo, then drove away. No rush, no screeching tires. Just a smooth exit, like they'd confirmed what they came to see. Frank wrote the plate number down. Hawk ran it within minutes. Nothing, he said. Shell company, no paper trail. But it was enough. They'd been seen. Later that night, the story broke. Someone had leaked the original image again, this time to a local Oregon forum. It went viral. A former high school teacher from the neighboring town posted, "I saw this same symbol years ago after my niece went missing. It was mailed to our house with no return address." Another post followed. "My sister disappeared in '09. This is the same mark we found on a necklace buried in her car trunk. Within hours, families from Colorado, Idaho, and Montana were responding. The pattern was breaking open. The phone rang. Ellie answered. A woman's voice, shaking. "Is this Officer Monroe?" "Yes. My name is Deirdre Grayson. My son went missing 3 years ago. They told me it was suicide, but I just saw the photo you posted. That medallion, he had one. He said someone gave it to him, said it was part of something important." Ellie's hand trembled. "Please," the woman said, "don't let them cover it up again." After she hung up, Ellie stood in the hallway, back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. "We can't stop now," she said. "No," Frank agreed. "Now we fight." They sat down that night and built a list. Every name, every location, every time Horizon One had touched something and disappeared into the shadows. And they didn't realize until the next morning just how loud their first move had been. Because when Ellie opened her front door, the air smelled of smoke. Her house, her real house, the one she'd grown up in, was gone, burned to the foundation. Ranger growled behind her. No note, no signature, just a silence that spoke louder than any fire alarm. Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. They've made their first move. Ellie didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply looked east, toward the trees, and whispered, "Now it's my turn." They didn't sleep. Not after the fire. Ellie stood at the edge of what used to be her childhood home, boots sinking into ash. The foundation was still warm beneath the morning frost. The smell of melted drywall, scorched memories, and gasoline hung in the air like a cruel whisper. Firefighters had come and gone. Official cause, electrical fault. Unofficial truth, intimidation. She didn't speak. Not to the officials, not to the gawking neighbors, not even to Frank, who stood nearby with his arms folded, jaw set tight. She just stared into the skeleton of her past until Ranger barked once, short and sharp, then turned and walked toward the road. Ellie followed. The message was clear. Horizon 1 had eyes everywhere. This wasn't just about burying a secret. This was about breaking the will of anyone who tried to speak it aloud. Frank placed a hand on her shoulder as they approached the cruiser. "They won't stop now." "I hope they don't," Ellie replied. They returned to the safe house by noon. Hawk was waiting, pacing barefoot on the porch with a cigarette clenched between his teeth and his laptop hugged to his chest. He didn't look up when they pulled in. "They made contact," he said. Frank frowned. "How?" "They tried to breach my proxy. Sloppy, but fast. They were watching the same forum thread we used last night. Someone tried to trace the origin post, probably thinking we were dumb enough to leave a back door." "And were we?" Ellie asked. He grinned. The cigarette twitching. "No, but I left them a gift." Hawk led them inside and pulled up his screen. A map bloomed into view, glowing with red markers. "They pinged a substation in southern Washington. Not official, but the access pattern matches old Horizon 1 tactics. Fast, masked, redirected through junk servers. But I found a mistake. Someone on the inside forgot to encrypt a return signal. I tracked it to an IP belonging to a company called Haven Bridge Logistics." "Never heard of it," Frank muttered. "You're not supposed to," Hawk said. "It's a front. Shell company tied to defense contracts. But get this, one of their logistics coordinators was a man named Darrell Mays." He clicked again. A photo appeared. A man in his late 50s, balding, with tired eyes and a deep scar across his chin. "He served under Drayton," Hawk added, "part of Horizon 1's logistics chain before the fall." Ellie felt the fire in her gut rise. "Where is he now?" "Portland, downtown. He runs operations from a small satellite office in the industrial district. Officially, he coordinates cross-border shipping routes for medical equipment. Unofficially, God knows what else." Frank crossed his arms. "We need to move fast." Hawk looked uneasy. "He's protected, I guarantee it. Cameras, bodyguards. If he smells something off, he'll vanish before we hit the front steps." Ellie stared at the screen. "Then we don't go to him. We bring him to us." Frank raised an eyebrow. "You thinking bait?" She nodded. "Hawk, can you leak something into his channels? Something that would make him curious?" "Like what?" Ellie picked up the medallion from the table. "Tell him it resurfaced. Tell him it's in my possession. Let's see if he sends someone to take it." Hawk cracked his knuckles. "You want subtle or explosive?" "Just enough to rattle his confidence." He turned back to his laptop. "Give me 10. 10 minutes later, a new post appeared. This time in a private military contractor chat room, buried behind 4 layers of encryption. A blurry photo of the medallion, half covered in dirt, tagged with false metadata, placing it in downtown Portland. The caption read, "Back from the dead. Someone wants to talk." Frank leaned against the wall. "And now we wait." They didn't wait long. By nightfall, Hawk picked up the first trace. A burner phone initiated a text to a secure Horizon 1 server. From there, The signal jumped to a Black Ops relay node used in several of Hawk's old case files. It landed back at Haven Bridge, at Darrell Mays's personal line. "He took the bait," Hawk said. The next morning, someone attempted to break into the Portland morgue where Emma Winslow's body was being held. The assailant wore a stolen EMT uniform. He had forged credentials, a silent weapon, and a nearly flawless plan. But Frank had been waiting. He tackled the man behind the rear entrance as he tried to disable the security panel. Ranger was on him in seconds, jaws locked around the man's forearm, bringing him to the ground without a sound. They got him into a van and drove 3 hours north to an abandoned warehouse Hawk had secured. The man refused to speak at first. No ID, no name, no rank. Ellie stood in the center of the room, staring down at him. Blood ran down his arm where Ranger had bitten him. He looked young, maybe 30, but his eyes were old, empty. She placed the medallion on the table between them. "You know what this is." He stared at it, silent. "I've seen what you people do," she said. "The rooms, the recordings. Emma, I've seen it all." Still silent, she leaned in closer. "You think this is about protecting secrets? It's not. It's about how many names I can get from you before this whole thing burns to the ground, starting with yours." The man shifted slightly. Something flickered in his expression. Not fear, calculation. Then he spoke, low, controlled. "You're already dead. You just haven't noticed yet." Frank stepped forward. "Talk, now." The man shook his head slowly. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Horizon 1 wasn't shut down. It was absorbed, repurposed. The people funding it wear suits now. You think you're facing mercenaries in the woods? You're not. You're facing Washington." Ellie stared at him. "Then give us names." He smiled. "You can't kill a system." Frank leaned in. "But we can carve the rot out of it." They recorded everything. The man gave them one name, a senator, active, powerful, former military liaison to Horizon 1. Then he clamped his mouth shut and refused another word. Ellie left the room shaken but resolved. Hawk was already uploading the footage. "You sure about this?" he asked. Ellie nodded. "If we go down, we go loud." The video hit the web 30 minutes later. By midnight, it had 1 million views. And at the same time, Frank's phone buzzed. He answered. A quiet voice on the other end. "They know. You're marked." The line went dead. They had struck, but now Horizon 1 was coming for them. The morning after the video went live, the nation woke up angry. It started small, posts on forums, frantic comments, shaky videos of weeping mothers recognizing the same symbol that haunted Ellie's desk. Then came the news outlets. The medallion, the girl, the warehouse confession. They didn't say Horizon 1, not yet, but they said enough. Ellie watched it unfold from the window of the safe house. Across the screen of her old television, the story broke into mainstream consciousness like a wound reopening. Anonymous video links murdered teen to Black Ops torture symbol. FBI refuses to comment. The media called it disturbing. Frank called it effective. Hawk called it a firestorm. But it didn't bring her relief. It brought silence. Not the natural quiet of forest dawns or small-town mornings, but a vacuum. Deliberate and planned. Her phone went dark. The local police station closed for network maintenance. The coroner's office was raided by federal agents claiming biological irregularities. And worst of all, Ranger stopped barking. He stood near the front door, staring, ears forward, as if waiting for something to come out of the trees. Ellie had never heard silence so loud. Frank walked in, holding a manila envelope. He dropped it on the table. "Mason Todd," he said. "Age 9. Reported missing yesterday in Roseburg. Last seen near a wooded creek bed behind his school." Ellie's heart cracked. 9. "Found this morning," Frank continued. "Same binding pattern, same shallow grave. No medallion this time, but his wrists." He hesitated. They were shattered. She sank into the chair, pressing her palms against her eyes. "They're accelerating." Hawk spun his laptop around. And they're masking it. Local news says it was an animal attack. No photos released, no press conference. The only reason we know is because someone leaked the coroner's file to a whistleblower inbox I monitor. They're trying to make the public think we're lying, Ellie said, that this is a conspiracy theory. They want to make the truth look like madness, Frank added. A knock rattled the door. They froze. Ranger didn't growl. He walked calmly to the door and sat. Frank signaled to Hawk, who checked the perimeter camera feed. It's a woman, alone, unarmed, crying. Ellie opened the door slowly. The woman was in her 50s, short grey curls tucked beneath a ball cap, eyes red from hours of weeping. She held a photo in her hands. A girl, 16, smiling, wearing braces and a flannel shirt. Behind her, tall pines stretched into a summer sky. "My daughter," the woman whispered. "Her name was Tara. She disappeared in '08. We lived in Salem then. The police called it a runaway." Ellie reached out and gently took the photo. "We found her backpack a month later, torn, no prints, no witnesses." The woman's voice trembled. "And 2 days ago, someone mailed this to me." She held up an envelope. Inside was a single object, brass, old, flat. A matching medallion, identical. "I saw your video," she said. I knew what they did. They tried to make me feel insane, but I know what I buried wasn't my daughter. The body they showed me. The hair was wrong. The scar on her wrist was gone." Ellie swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "They gave you someone else's child." The woman nodded. "I buried a lie." Frank stepped forward. "Frank, we need your help." "I'll do anything." "Then speak," he said, "on camera." That evening they filmed her story. Her name was Madeline Foster. She told it all. No makeup, no edits, no filters, just a mother with nothing left to lose. The video was uploaded before midnight. Within hours it trended across every platform. And then the real pushback began. Ellie's photo appeared on a fringe news site, twisted into an article claiming she fabricated the entire case to launch a political career. Her police file was leaked. 2 minor reprimands from early in her service were twisted into unethical behavior. Conspiracy theorists called her unstable, a threat, a liar. Ranger was labeled a trained attack dog used for intimidation. "They're coming apart," Hawk said. "This is what desperation looks like." But Ellie didn't feel victorious. Not when she opened her inbox the next morning and found hundreds of emails. Most were support, some were threats, and one, it was different. It had no subject line, no greeting, just a photo. A girl, pale, eyes wide with terror, sitting on a floor of concrete, back against a steel wall. A date scribbled in the corner, April 4th, 6 days from now. The girl was still alive. "They're escalating," Frank said. "Pushing emotional damage now. This is hostage theater." Ellie stared at the image. "She looks like she's underground." "Possible bunker," Hawk added. "There's rust on the ceiling, condensation on the wall, and if you zoom in, there's a stamp on the back of her shirt. A logo!" He enhanced it. Ellie leaned closer. "A hawk with spread wings." Hawk frowned. "That's Old Horizon branding, from their Pacific Northwest operations, before they went dark." Frank tapped the map. "I remember a compound, not on record, deep in the Olympic Peninsula. No roads lead to it. They used it for psychological isolations." Ellie nodded. "Then that's where we go." "You sure?" Hawk asked. "This won't be clean." "No," she said. "It won't." They packed in silence. Ranger waited by the door. As they stepped into the cold night, the wind shifted. The trees swayed, whispering warnings. But Ellie didn't hesitate. The veil had moved. Now, she would pull it down with her own hands. The Olympic Peninsula was a fortress of green and silence. Towering evergreens stretched toward the sky like sentinels, their thick branches blotting out the sun, filtering daylight into a dim, haunting twilight. Rain dripped in a slow rhythm onto moss-covered earth, soaking into the gravel path beneath Ellie's boots. She hadn't spoken since they passed the last town. Ranger sat in the back of the van, alert and tense, eyes fixed on the dense curtain of trees ahead. He knew, somehow, He always did. Frank drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Hawk sat in the passenger seat, scanning a tablet that flickered with grainy satellite images and infrared overlays. The road had long since turned to dirt. No signage, no markers, just raw, untouched wilderness. The kind of place people disappear into. The kind of place people are buried in. The photo of the girl was folded in Ellie's pocket. She'd looked at it a dozen times. Her face, her posture, the details. There was something familiar in her eyes, something Ellie had seen in the mirror after her father's funeral, in the cold months after the car accident that took her brother. That look of silent pleading, of knowing no one is coming. Except this time, someone was. Frank pulled the van into a thicket of trees and killed the engine. This is as close as we get without being seen. They stepped out into the wet hush. Hawk carried a portable receiver slung over his shoulder, its antenna rising into the mist like a warning. Ellie slung her weapon across her chest, checked her sidearm, then nodded. Ranger moved ahead without command, nose low, scanning the path. They walked single file, boots muffled by pine needles and soaked leaves. After 20 minutes, the forest broke, abruptly, unnaturally, into a clearing carved out by machines. At the center stood a concrete bunker, half submerged in the ground, camouflaged by overgrowth. No lights, no noise. Frank raised his binoculars. 3 cameras, 2 motion sensors. They didn't bury this place, they fortified it. "I can jam their feed," Hawk said, "for 30 seconds maybe, long enough for us to breach." Ellie adjusted her gear. "Let's make it count." The plan was simple. Frank would breach the east entrance, a side door hidden under a loading ramp. Ellie and Ranger would circle to the western wall, where Hawk had identified an old exhaust vent, large enough for 1 person and a dog. Once inside, they'd rendezvous at the lower level, where prisoners were likely held. The risk was enormous. If the girl in the photo was alive, she'd be guarded. If she wasn't, Ellie didn't let herself consider that. She just moved. They split at the edge of the clearing. Ellie crouched beside the vent, pried it open with a crowbar, and slid inside. Ranger followed with a soft thump. The tunnel reeked of mold and rust. Water dripped somewhere deeper in, echoing like footsteps. Ellie crawled slowly, rifle tight to her chest, until she saw faint light ahead. She paused, whispered, "Go!" and Ranger padded forward. Seconds later he barked. Once, low and quick, clear. Ellie emerged into a narrow corridor lined with steel doors, each marked only with a number. No windows, no handles. The silence was worse than any scream. She crept forward, counting the doors. 5, 6, 7. Then a sound, a soft thud, like something falling. She froze, pressed her ear to door 8, breathing. She knocked once, gently, nothing. Then from inside, a whisper, "Please." She unlatched the lock, and the door creaked open. The girl from the photo sat curled in the corner, knees to her chest, eyes red and swollen. Her wrists were raw. Chains bolted to the wall clattered as she flinched away. "It's okay," Ellie whispered. "I'm here to take you home." The girl blinked. "Are you real?" Ellie stepped in and knelt. "Yeah, and I brought backup." Ranger trotted in, tongue out, tail low. The girl gasped, then for the first time smiled. Ellie unlatched the cuffs and gently lifted her to her feet. She was light, starved, but she could walk. "Name?" Ellie asked softly. "Lena," the girl whispered. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Ellie spun, weapon raised. Frank rounded the corner, rifle in hand. "We've got company." "How many?" "At least 6. Gear, comms, training, not amateurs." Ellie looked at Lena. "Can you run?" The girl nodded. "Then stay behind me and follow Ranger. He won't let you fall." They moved fast, through corridors lined with empty rooms, observation windows and surgical tables. Ellie's stomach turned. They passed a chamber filled with screens. One still displayed a paused frame. Ellie's face from the leaked video. She was already a target. There was no more hiding. Gunfire cracked through the hallway. Frank returned fire, his aim calm, precise. Hawk's voice came through their comms. "I've scrambled their feed. You've got 1 minute. I'm blowing the outer door." Ellie shoved Lena forward. "Run!" They burst through the exit as the outer blast echoed like thunder. Smoke filled the clearing. Sirens wailed in the distance. They didn't stop. By the time they reached the van, Hawk was already in the driver's seat, blood on his forehead but grinning. "You guys always bring this much fun?" "Drive," Ellie said, shoving Lena into the back seat. As the forest swallowed the compound behind them, Lena began to cry, not from fear, but from release. Ellie sat beside her, holding her hand, feeling her own walls crack. "You're safe now," she whispered. Lena shook her head. "No one's safe. They said there's more. They're building something bigger. They said it's just beginning." Ellie looked at Frank. His eyes were grim. And Hawk, watching them through the rearview mirror, said what they were all thinking. They're not hiding anymore. They're preparing. The cabin they brought Lena to was hidden deep in the Cascades, where cell towers didn't reach and old hunting trails had been long abandoned. A single wood stove provided warmth. No power, no lights, no electronics. Just silence and the dull snap of burning cedar. Ellie sat with Lena by the fire, wrapping gauze gently around the girl's wrists. Ranger lay between them like a sentry, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes never closed. Lena spoke in fragments, like memory had been chewed apart and spit back as splinters. "They never used names, only numbers," she whispered. "They called me Subject 42, said I was the last of the Oregon batch." "Oregon batch?" Ellie asked softly. Lena nodded. "They said it was just one node, that there were others, other girls, boys. Some didn't make it. Others were taken away. Where? I don't know, but they kept saying something about the threshold protocol, that once the trials were over, they'd initiate it." Frank sat across the room, arms crossed, eyes burning holes through the floorboards. Hawk leaned against the window frame, arms folded, his mind already racing 10 steps ahead. "They're escalating," Frank muttered. "This isn't just about data anymore. They're building towards something coordinated." Ellie looked down at Lena. "Do you remember who ran your facility?" Lena hesitated. "I didn't see him much, but when he came, everyone got quiet. Even the guards. They called him Colonel." Ellie's stomach sank. Frank sat up. "Vance Drayton?" Lena flinched at the name. "Yes, that's him. They said he was dead, but he wasn't. He was there. He watched me." Frank stood and walked outside, slamming the door behind him. Ellie didn't follow. She stayed with Lena until the girl fell asleep, then covered her with a wool blanket and rose quietly. She found Frank in the cold, leaning on a tree, breath misting in the air. "You okay?" she asked. "No," he said, "because if Drayton's alive, everything changes." Ellie folded her arms. "I thought you said he died in South Sudan. Explosion. Body recovered." "I was wrong," Frank said, eyes fixed on the dark. "I should have known better. That man doesn't die. He erases himself." Ellie stepped closer. "Tell me who he really is." Frank hesitated, then spoke low. "Vance Drayton was a field officer when I met him. Quiet, calculating. He believed in control through chaos. Said that when people were broken, they became obedient. Horizon 1 let him test that theory. Gave him a blank check and a list of targets. Civilians, children. He saw them as data points." Ellie felt the bile rise in her throat. "He disappeared when Horizon 1 went down," Frank continued. "We all assumed he was taken out to prevent testimony, but if he's resurfaced now, he's not just cleaning up," Ellie finished. "He's starting something new." Frank nodded once. Back inside, Hawk was typing furiously, his face pale under the dim firelight. "I've got something," he said. "You're not going to like it." Ellie approached. "Show me." He turned the screen. A video, low res, posted an hour ago on an encrypted channel Hawk monitored. The title was simple, "Message to the Interfering." Ellie clicked play. Drayton stood in a dark room, face in shadow but unmistakable. The voice, the posture, it was him. "To those who have broken the silence," he began, "consider this your only warning. You think you've exposed something. You haven't. You've simply stepped into a current too deep to swim. You forced my hand, and now you'll watch." He stepped aside. Behind him a man knelt, bound, bloodied, eyes swollen shut. Ellie recognized him instantly. "Daniel Keene," she whispered. "He was one of ours, a whistleblower, former logistics tech for Horizon." Drayton placed a hand on the man's shoulder. This one chose to speak, to betray the sanctity of the operation. "But we don't silence people out of vengeance. We do it for control." He drew a blade. Ellie turned away before it happened, but the sound, wet, final, still reached her. The screen went black. One final sentence appeared: "Your turn is coming." No names, no timestamp. But the message was unmistakable. Hawk stood. "He's declaring war." Frank's jaw clenched. "He already started it." Ellie felt her hands shake, not from fear, but rage. "Then let's hit back." "We will," Hawk said, "but not with firepower, with exposure." He pulled up a map on the screen. Drayton slipped up. In the background of that video there was a sound, a foghorn, unique pitch. I ran it through a database. It matches a port on the southern Washington coast. Small, unregistered, used mostly by private cargo outfits. Frank nodded. "Means he's not hiding deep inland anymore. He's staging something at sea." Ellie looked at Lena, still asleep. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough," Hawk said, "but maybe enough for one move. If we leak this video, the raw, uncut feed, complete with Drayton's face, we force the world to see what we're fighting. No edits, no denials." Frank looked hesitant. "That could draw retaliation." "It will," Ellie said. "But if we do nothing, we're just waiting to be picked off." She walked to the fire, picked up the medallion from the floor, and held it tightly. "Let them come," she whispered. "Let the whole system come." Hawk clicked upload. The world saw Drayton's face an hour later. And in the silence that followed, families across the country whispered the same name that had haunted their nightmares for years. Finally spoken. Finally real. The broadcast detonated across the country like a firestorm. There was no press release, no government denial, no carefully worded statement of ongoing investigation. Just silence. Paralyzing. Deliberate silence, as if the institutions that should have reacted were still checking with their lawyers. But the people responded. Within hours, the footage of Colonel Vance Drayton executing Daniel Keene was everywhere. It crawled across social media, bounced between encrypted channels and backroom forums, flooded comment sections and cable news feeds. People recognized him. A retired Marine in Georgia, a former defense contractor in Nevada, a teacher in Virginia who once claimed her brother vanished during a contract job in Syria. It wasn't just a monster exposed, it was a shared memory, long buried, finally named. Ellie stood in the corner of Hawk's makeshift command post, a cup of coffee cooling in her hand, untouched. Frank leaned over the map table again, but this time the pins weren't isolated. They connected by logistics lines, flight manifests, procurement trails. Hawk's algorithm was building something big, something horrifying. "They didn't hide it," he said. "They compartmentalized it, buried each piece in a different division. The experimentation, that was under a defunct psychological operations wing. The bodies, categorized as non-combatant collateral. The funding, run through joint task force budgets. No single department ever had the full picture. Until now," Ellie said. Hawk turned. "Until you forced it into the light." Frank tapped a line of red markers on the map. "These are confirmed sites: Oregon, Idaho, Northern California. Small towns, dense forests, every one of them close to a civilian population base, just isolated enough for bodies to disappear." "And the pattern?" Ellie asked. "They rotate testing locations every 3 years," Hawk explained. "Each cycle is preceded by a spike in local disappearances, flagged as runaways, overdoses, suicides, then a year of quiet. Then it begins again." Ellie's voice was cold. "How many are dead?" Hawk hesitated. "Over 100. That's just what I can estimate. Could be triple that." Frank picked up the medallion again. "And every one of them was a data point in a system designed to break people." Hawk tapped his keyboard. "But there's more." He pulled up a document, classified, redacted, but partially decrypted. A heading at the top read, Horizon 1, Threshold Directive, Interrogation Resistance Development Initiative. Below it, bullet points, cold, clinical, subjects selected from vulnerable demographics, isolation procedures tested, pain resilience thresholds mapped, behavioral dissociation encouraged, Phase 2, domestic deployment readiness. Ellie read the last line aloud. Domestic deployment? Frank didn't blink. They weren't just testing resistance, they were designing interrogation techniques for use here, on U.S. soil. She stepped back, heart pounding. They plan to use it on civilians? They already did, Hawk said. During protests, during detainment scenarios. They used it selectively, secretly. But it's there, hidden under layers of legal camouflage. Ellie sat down hard. This is a crime against humanity, funded with tax dollars. Frank looked grim, and protected by people who still hold power. Who? She asked. Hawk hesitated. The web leads to Capitol Hill, Senate subcommittees. A few names keep popping up, always tied to the same appropriations packages, the same black budget allocations. The money never stopped flowing. It just changed shape. Ellie stood. Give me names. He clicked again. Photos appeared, smiling portraits from campaign websites, press conferences, award ceremonies. Senators, high-ranking defense officials, CEOs of contracting firms, all polished, all powerful. One name stood out, Senator Robert Glanville, chair of the Armed Services Subcommittee on Advanced Threat Response, decorated, respected, and neck-deep in Horizon 1 funding channels. Ellie stared at his face. He knew. He did more than know, Hawk said. He signed off on the Threshold Directive himself. He pushed it through under the guise of counter-terrorism preparedness. Frank folded his arms. You'll never get him in a courtroom. Then we don't, Ellie said. We get him on tape. Frank looked at her. That's suicide. No, she replied. It's leverage. They spent the next 24 hours planning the bait, a meeting, a staged offer. Ellie would pose as a whistleblower, willing to trade the original Horizon files, what Hawk had pulled from buried servers, in exchange for immunity. The offer would be fake, the threat real. The meeting would take place in D.C. Frank hated every second of it. If he smells a trap, he won't, Hawk said. These men are used to arrogance. They believe the system protects them. That makes them blind. Ellie packed light. She brought the medallion, her badge, a burner phone. And Ranger. He hadn't left her side once since the video went live. His eyes were sharper now, his movements more cautious, as if he understood what they were about to walk into. The night before the flight, Ellie sat outside the cabin and watched the moon rise through the branches. Frank joined her. You don't have to do this, he said. I do, she replied. He was quiet for a while, then handed her something, a photo. Emma Winslow, smiling on a swing set, the sun behind her. I never had a daughter, Frank said. But if I did, I'd want her to be like you. Ellie didn't speak. She just nodded and tucked the photo into her jacket. At dawn, they boarded the plane. As it climbed into the sky, Hawk's words echoed in her mind. You forced them into the light. Now she was heading straight into the heart of their darkness. Washington, D.C. was colder than Ellie remembered. The air wasn't just chilled by wind, but by something intangible. Layers of history. Ambition and quiet betrayal pressing down like frost on every corner. From the plane window, the Capitol had looked sterile in the morning haze, marble white and distant. But now, walking down the side streets of Capitol Hill with Ranger at her side, Ellie felt none of the awe she once did. Only calculation. Frank walked slightly behind her, coat collar up, hat pulled low. Hawk had stayed behind in Oregon to maintain the feeds, ready to pull the trigger on the next wave of data leaks. Ellie carried a flash drive in her coat pocket. It contained real Horizon 1 documents, sanitized versions, incomplete, but damning enough to force panic in the right hands. The real files were still locked in encrypted cold storage. This was bait. She just needed Glanville to bite. Senator Robert Glanville had agreed to a private meeting in a hotel 2 blocks from the Capitol, an unremarkable mid-tier chain where politicians conducted the kind of business they didn't want seen inside government walls. The message Ellie sent him was brief. "You know who I am. I have the files. I want immunity. One meeting. No handlers." He replied within the hour. Frank waited in the lobby, while Ellie and Ranger took the elevator alone. The floor was empty when the doors opened. Room 705. She walked slowly, each step measured. She could feel the blood beating in her neck. Her fingers brushed the edge of her sidearm through the coat lining, not out of fear, but readiness. She knocked once. The door opened. Senator Glanville stood in a charcoal suit, immaculate and relaxed, as if greeting a constituent rather than a threat. His hair was perfectly combed, his smile hollow. "Ms. Monroe," he said, "you're braver than I expected." "And you're cleaner than I expected," she replied. He gestured for her to enter. Ranger growled low. Glanville gave the dog a sidelong glance but said nothing. Inside, the suite was modest. A small table had been set near the window. Coffee, 2 chairs, the drapes were drawn. Ellie sat first. Glanville mirrored her, folding his hands over the table. "I assume you're recording this," he said. "Of course," he smiled. "Good. Then let's make it worth history's time." Ellie placed the flash drive on the table. "This is enough to open a dozen investigations, but not enough to convict," he said. "You'd need more. Names, voice logs, financial trails. We have those." Glanville tilted his head. "I don't think you do. If you did, you wouldn't be here offering deals. You'd be at a press conference." She didn't blink. "You don't want this out." "No," he said. "But I'm not afraid of it. That should worry you." Ellie leaned forward. "You funded Horizon 1. You greenlit their domestic operations. You looked at those files and called it security. And now you're complicit in the murder of at least 100 civilians, including children." Glanville didn't flinch. "You think the American people want the truth? They want the illusion of control. They want a government that does the dirty work out of you. I gave them that." Ellie's voice dropped. "You gave them nightmares." He smiled again, just barely. "And you gave them chaos. You lit a match in a room soaked in gasoline." Ranger growled again, louder this time. The senator's smile vanished. "This ends one of 2 ways, Ms. Monroe. Either you walk out of here and disappear into obscurity, or I ensure you're discredited and buried before the week's out." "You forgot the third option," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I go public with this recording, and I let the people decide." Glanville leaned back, folding his arms. "You won't live long enough to upload it." Ellie stood. "So be it." She walked to the door and paused. "You know what separates you from the people you buried?" He didn't respond. "They never had a voice, but I do, and now they do too." She stepped into the hallway, and Ranger spun suddenly, barking. A man emerged from the stairwell, dressed in a hotel uniform, but moving like he'd carried a rifle more recently than a tray of towels. His hand reached inside his jacket. Frank appeared out of nowhere, slamming the man against the wall, disarming him with a single vicious twist. The pistol clattered to the floor. "Time to go," Frank said. They descended the stairs fast, pushing through the lobby. Ellie could feel eyes on her. A couple near the entrance stood too still. A man by the desk turned away too quickly. Surveillance was already in place. The trap they'd set had worked, but they were inside it now. Outside, a black SUV was parked crooked along the curb. Frank opened the back door. Ranger jumped in. Ellie followed. Tires screeched as they pulled into traffic. Frank didn't speak for 2 blocks. Then, "You get it?" She held up the recording device. "Every word." He nodded. "That's all we needed." They crossed the bridge out of the city. As the skyline faded behind them, Ellie exhaled for the first time in hours. Hawk was waiting in a rented cabin just outside of Alexandria. When they arrived, he met them at the door with a laptop already humming. "You did it?" he asked. Ellie handed him the recorder. He plugged it in, transferred the file, cleaned the audio. Glanville's voice filled the room. Cold, calm, confessional. Hawk played it once, then again. Then he uploaded it. Within minutes, the first threads began to appear. Sitting senator admits to funding black site operations. Recordings confirm threshold testing on US civilians. The hashtags were brutal, the images worse. And behind them all, one name kept rising: Horizon 1. By midnight, 5 more officials were named. 3 corporate sponsors were tied to hidden budgets. 1 former general was placed under protective custody, but the biggest name, the one no one had seen in years, was trending too. Drayton. And Ellie knew why. Because a predator doesn't vanish when exposed. He hunts faster. The first break in the story didn't come from the media or a leak. It came from a child's drawing. 2 days after the Glanville recording went public, a teacher in Spokane posted an anonymous message online. She'd recognized something in the symbol Ellie had exposed. A crude version of it had appeared weeks earlier in a drawing by one of her students, a quiet boy named Ethan. When questioned gently, Ethan said it was the badge the men wore when they took his brother into the woods. The post went viral. Ellie read it in a roadside diner at 3 in the morning, her coffee long since cold. Frank sat across from her, poring over flight manifests and blacked-out budget lines. Hawk slept in the van, laptop against his chest. The road was starting to wear on all of them, but the momentum was shifting. The people were no longer afraid of shadows. They were naming them. Ellie opened her laptop and clicked through a dozen new messages. Some were from journalists, others from survivors. But one email stopped her breath. It had no sender name, just a subject line. I was there. Inside was a short note. I worked logistics for Horizon 1 in 2009. I know where the master logs are stored. Off-grid server vault, Oregon Cascades. They kept backups for insurance. They never trusted DC. I can get you in. But if you come armed. It was signed Elias Grant. Frank read it over her shoulder. You believe him? He gave us specifics. Coordinates. Names of locations we hadn't published yet. Frank rubbed his chin. He might be bait, but if he's real, those logs could blow this wide open. We go, Ellie said. By noon, they were back on the road. The location Grant provided was deep in the Cascade foothills, miles from any cell tower. The kind of terrain that swallowed hikers and hunters without a trace. They parked at a service road long abandoned, then hiked 2 hours into a section of forest that Ranger had begun sniffing long before they spotted any sign of structure. It was Hawk who spotted the antenna first, buried under moss and stone, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Beneath it, a concrete hatch. No locks, Frank noted. That's confidence. Ellie gripped her weapon tighter. Or arrogance. They opened the hatch and descended into cold, stale air. The passageway led into a subterranean vault. Rows of servers lined the walls, blinking red and blue. A faint hum filled the air. The place was still alive. In the center of the room stood a man in his 60s, hands raised. I'm Grant, he said. I heard your truck half a mile off. Ellie didn't lower her weapon. Why contact us now? Grant exhaled. Because Drayton crossed the line. And because I have a granddaughter, she's 12. Last week, she came home with a flyer from a school program called Resilience Evaluation Initiative. I looked it up. It's Horizon. New name, same mission. They're recruiting children now, in plain sight. Ellie lowered her weapon. Show me the logs, she said. Grant moved quickly, but not panicked. He tapped into a terminal, entered a string of credentials. Files appeared, hundreds of them. Each one tagged with project codes, subject numbers, locations. Ellie scanned them in disbelief. These weren't field reports, they were confessions, video logs, audio transcriptions, test results, biometric data, torture indexes, timetables of psychological disintegration. Some names were redacted, others weren't. Emma Winslow, Subject 37, Lena, Subject 42, dozens more. Girls and boys from towns Ellie had patrolled, names she remembered from missing posters now long forgotten. She covered her mouth. Frank placed a hand on her shoulder. We copy everything, she said. Hawk set up the data transfer. It would take hours. "Once we have these," Ellie said, "there's no coming back, no hiding. Not for them, and not for us." Grant nodded. "That's why I called you." As the files transferred, Ellie sat in a folding chair beside the server rack, Ranger curled at her feet. She didn't speak. She couldn't. These weren't just numbers. These were lives, shattered, reduced to metrics. She saw one entry that noted, "Subject 29 survived 9 days without light, promising for field trauma tolerance. 9 days. A child." She stood, rage flooding her. "We don't wait," she said. "We leak this, all of it." Frank turned to her. "We need to vet—" "No," Ellie cut in. "The time for controlled releases is over. This ends now. Let the world choke on what it's allowed to stay hidden." They moved fast. Hawk compressed the files into a master archive. Ellie recorded a short video, just her face, raw, unfiltered, eyes swollen with sleeplessness. "These are not rumors," she said. "These are names, children, victims. This is not conspiracy. This is evidence. The medallion was real. The pain was real. And now the truth is real too. We're done whispering. We are speaking now. For those who were silenced." Hawk uploaded it. The internet erupted. Within hours, hashtags trended globally. Journalists demanded access. Congressional aides resigned. Family members of the missing gathered at town halls, holding up printouts of the files, screaming names into cameras. No more silence. But the noise came at a cost. By dusk, Hawk's security alerts lit up like fireworks. "There's movement near the access road," he said. "Multiple heat signatures. They found us." Frank cocked his rifle. "Time to go." Ellie grabbed the drive, slung it over her neck. "We hold them long enough to get this to the press." "No," Grant said. "I'll stay. I know this place. I can hold them off. Get out while you still can." Ellie started to protest, but he raised a hand. "I helped build this," he said. "Let me help tear it down." They ran. Through the trees, down the slope, Ranger leading the way. Behind them, gunfire erupted, sharp and controlled. Then silence. Ellie didn't stop running. By the time they reached the van, Grant was gone. But the truth wasn't. It was in her pocket now, and she wasn't letting go. The storm hit D.C. before sunrise. Grey skies swollen with tension, streets emptied of their usual chaos, the air pulsing with a pressure that no meteorologist could explain. But Ellie felt it, in her bones, the way a soldier feels the shift before a battle begins. Her phone hadn't stopped vibrating for hours. Reporters, law firms, survivor groups, congressional aides who'd once scoffed, now scrambling for safe ground. She ignored them all. The files from the vault had detonated on a global scale. Horizon 1 wasn't a conspiracy anymore. It was a reckoning. Evidence now sat on the desks of senators and judges. Victim names were read aloud on the House floor. School districts cancelled programs. Defense contractors suspended operations. The Pentagon issued a statement that said nothing, but the silence behind it screamed of fear. Still, Drayton hadn't surfaced, not until this morning. Hawk intercepted a call made on a private channel, military-grade encryption, routed through dead satellites and obsolete relays. It shouldn't have even been traceable, but Hawk was good, too good. He cracked it. "Drayton's here," Hawk said, eyes fixed on the screen. "In the city." Ellie's heart didn't skip, it clenched. "He's going after Senator Glanville," Hawk continued. "Tonight, 7:40 p.m., the hotel garage entrance. Glanville's been forced to testify before a classified hearing tomorrow. If Drayton gets to him, the rest of our leverage dies with him." Frank grabbed his sidearm and clipped his vest. "Then we intercept." Ellie checked her holster, looked down at Ranger. "Let's end this." By dusk, they were in place. The hotel was high-end, but quiet. Old money quiet. The kind of place used for discretion, where bellhops didn't ask questions and security guards knew better than to interfere. Glanville's team had already been told to stay out of sight. He'd arrived through the garage entrance in a black town car, shielded by 2 aides and a driver. Drayton would strike there. Hawk was sure of it. Ellie crouched behind a concrete column 3 levels beneath the street. The garage was nearly empty, each sound magnified into echoes. Ranger sat low beside her, ears forward, nose twitching at the stale scent of oil and rubber. Frank took the opposite flank, a floor above, rifle trained on the entry ramp. Hawk waited in a surveillance van nearby, monitoring thermal cams and radio chatter. 6:59 p.m. Nothing. 7:12 p.m. The Blacktown car rolled in. No sirens, no escort, just another car in a forgotten garage. It slowed near the stairwell. The driver stepped out. Glanville emerged behind him, briefcase in hand, expression flat. 7:36 p.m. Ellie moved, silent as breath, inching closer to the stairwell door. Then everything fractured. A motorcycle roared into the garage, silent engine modified for stealth, tires screeching across the floor. The rider wore all black, helmeted, no plates. He dismounted before the bike even stopped, pulled a compact weapon from beneath his jacket, and opened fire. The driver went down instantly. The aide screamed. Glanville dove behind a column, blood on his sleeve. The shooter advanced fast, methodical, not a wild strike, a surgical kill. "Drayton," Ellie whispered. She broke cover and fired. The first shot slammed into the wall behind him. The second clipped his shoulder. He turned with an eerie calm, raising his weapon. But Ranger was already on him. The dog launched, slamming into Drayton's torso, knocking him back. He rolled, fast, vicious, punching Ranger across the snout. The shepherd yelped, but didn't retreat. Frank's voice cut through the radio. "Take the shot!" "I don't have it," Ellie shouted. Drayton fired again, 2 rounds wide, but it was enough to force Ellie to cover. Then Frank dropped from the upper level like a ghost. He landed hard, knees buckling, but his aim was true. A bullet tore into Drayton's leg, spinning him. Ellie sprinted forward. Drayton crawled for his weapon. She kicked it away and leveled hers at his face. He smiled. The same smile she'd seen in that video. That mask of control, but his eyes were something else now. "Too late," he rasped. "Too late for what?" Ellie demanded. "They've already moved it." He coughed, blood spraying his lips. "Threshold wasn't just a phase. It was a seed. What you found, what you think you've exposed, that's only the beginning. You stopped me, but not them." Ellie tightened her grip. "Where?" He laughed, a wet, broken sound. "You think they told me? I was a soldier, just a tool, like the rest." She stared at him, her mind racing, trying to read between the fragments. Ranger stood beside her, head low, ears down. "I should kill you," she whispered. Drayton didn't flinch. "Do it! I've already buried more than you'll ever know." Frank limped over, weapon still raised. Ellie looked into Drayton's eyes and saw nothing. No remorse. No doubt. Just the fading shadow of a man who had believed in control so completely that he became a monster to maintain it. She lowered her weapon. "No," she said. "You're going to testify." Drayton's eyes twitched. "You won't get me on the stand." Frank nodded. "That's true." Then, without ceremony, he slammed the butt of his rifle into Drayton's temple. The colonel collapsed. Sirens wailed in the distance, delayed, muted, but coming. Ellie knelt beside Ranger, inspecting the gash along his side. Nothing fatal. The dog leaned into her hand, breathing slow. "You did good, buddy," she whispered. Frank looked at Glanville, now pale, speechless behind his column. "You still alive?" The senator nodded. "Then tomorrow," Frank said. "You better open your mouth." The authorities arrived minutes later. They tried to take control, but the evidence was already uploaded. Drayton was unconscious, cuffed, bleeding in the back of an unmarked vehicle. Cameras caught everything. The country would wake to headlines again. But this time, there was no denial, only reckoning. The silence in the interrogation room was the kind that didn't ask questions. It waited for confessions. Drayton sat at the center, handcuffed to a steel table, his right eye swollen shut from the strike that had brought him down. His breathing was shallow but steady, like a man whose war was already lost, and who now counted each breath as an act of defiance. Ellie watched him through the one-way mirror. Her hands were cold, even in her coat pockets. She hadn't spoken a word to him since the arrest, hadn't stepped foot into the room. Not because she feared him, but because she didn't want to give him more power than he already held. Frank leaned against the wall beside her, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the back of the colonel's bowed head. He hasn't said a word since we brought him in. Won't eat, won't ask for a lawyer. Just sits there, waiting. For what? Ellie asked. Frank's jaw tightened. For the next order that isn't coming. They stood in silence for a long time. Then Hawk entered the observation room holding a tablet. We got clearance, limited. He's not going to a federal prison yet. They're keeping him in an undisclosed military facility until the classified hearings finish. But we've got access for one more visit. Ellie nodded. Frank looked at her. You sure? She opened the door without answering. Drayton didn't look up as she entered. The room was sterile, cold, the kind of cold that seeped through your clothes and left its mark in your bones. Ellie sat across from him, slowly, placing a thin file on the table between them. Inside were photos, victims, files, test results. One name stood out, paper-clipped to the top. Emma Winslow. She waited. Still, he said nothing. Emma was 16, Ellie said quietly. She liked hiking, drawing. Her mom said she used to leave little sketches on her windowsill for the birds. One of them showed up in your files. It had notations around it. Psychological projections. Drayton's fingers twitched, just once. I read them, she continued. You called her moderately pliable and emotionally inconsistent under duress. Like she was a lab rat. He finally looked up. There was no hatred in his eyes, no arrogance, only something worse, resignation. You think I enjoyed it, he said. I don't care what you enjoyed, Ellie replied. I care why. He closed his eyes. Because I believed we were building something. She leaned forward. You tortured children. We were preparing a generation for what was coming, he said. You don't understand. We were told to build resilience, to simulate enemy tactics, to harden the next wave of operators. You buried them in forests, she snapped. You erased their names. They weren't supposed to die, he said. Not all of them. Ellie's voice dropped. But they did, and you watched. He looked at the file, at Emma's photo. For a moment, only a moment, his expression changed. His lip quivered, his shoulders dropped, and Ellie saw something she never expected, regret. He reached into his pocket slowly. She tensed, but he pulled out a small, worn photograph. He placed it on the table, a girl, maybe 8 years old, maybe. Blonde hair, missing front tooth, standing next to a birthday cake. The smile was so wide it nearly broke the frame. My daughter, he whispered. Claire. Ellie said nothing. She died before any of this, he said. Leukemia. We tried everything. Clinical trials, foreign meds, nothing worked. When Horizon approached me, I was already broken. They offered me purpose, a war to fight. He looked up again. I became something else. Not because I hated them, but because I stopped feeling anything. Ellie stared at the photo. You let your pain become your compass. He nodded. I want to hate you, she said. And I do. But part of me wonders if you ever felt anything when you watched those kids scream. And if you did, why didn't you stop? His eyes welled, not with tears, but with something deeper, a fracture. Because stopping meant admitting I was the monster, he whispered. Ranger whimpered outside the door, sensing her shift in energy. Ellie stood. You don't get to cry. You don't get to feel this now. She slid Emma's photo across the table. You look at her, and you carry her face with you for the rest of your life, because that's all you'll have. She turned and walked out. Frank was waiting. Well, he's broken, she said, but not enough. Hawk stepped forward. He gave us something, a location, a storage unit in New Jersey. Said it was his failsafe, journals, logs, stuff he kept in case the agency turned on him. Ellie nodded. Then we find it. 2 days later they did. A grim, windowless unit filled with file boxes, journals, and a locked trunk. Inside the trunk were sketches, drawn in pencil, some smudged, others soaked in old stains. Children's faces, body outlines, notations. But one sketch stood out, a girl in a sundress, arms stretched toward the sun. Her smile was crooked, her hair wild, her eyes hopeful. It was Claire. Ellie sat down on the concrete floor, the drawing in her lap. Monsters didn't cry, but sometimes they remembered what it was like not to be one. She stood and lit a match. The journals burned slow and bitter, and Ellie let them. Not every truth needed to survive. It started quietly, the way healing always does. One by one, families came forward, not reporters, not activists, not attorneys, just people, mothers, fathers, siblings, carrying folded papers, faded photographs, and trembling voices. Some stood outside courthouses, others gathered in school gymnasiums and churches, picnic shelters. They read names out loud, not for justice, not yet, just to make them real again. The first memorial went up in Oregon, near Pine Brook. A cluster of trees had been cleared where Emma Winslow's body had been found. The county donated the land. Volunteers built a small wooden archway with her name etched into it. Beneath it, a path wound through the pines, leading to a circle of benches around a stone pedestal. On top, a bronze plaque bore a single inscription: "We were lost, but we were never silent." Ellie stood beside it, hands in her coat pockets, heart hammering. The dedication ceremony had drawn nearly 200 people. Locals, former classmates, complete strangers. A few news crews hovered near the back, quiet for once. She didn't want to speak, but they asked her to, so she stepped forward. Ranger followed and sat at her feet, tail still, eyes locked on the crowd. Ellie cleared her throat, holding a piece of paper that had long since become damp in her grip. "They say the woods are quiet," she began, voice shaking, "that when you step into them, the world fades and the silence takes over. But that's not true. The woods speak. If you listen, you'll hear them. Every wind through the branches, every breath in the soil. And sometimes you hear the ones who were taken." She looked down, trying to steady herself. Emma Winslow wasn't supposed to be found, but Ranger wouldn't stop barking, wouldn't stop digging. He listened, and because of that, we found her. And then we found the others. She looked back up, eyes glassy but resolute. "I didn't solve this case. I didn't save them. I just refused to stop hearing them. And now, it's our job, all of us, to keep listening." The crowd was silent. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Soon, the clearing filled with applause, not for victory, but for acknowledgement, for presence, for refusal to forget. Later, Ellie knelt beside the pedestal and ran her fingers over the plaque. Ranger rested his chin on her knee. She looked at him. "You started this," she whispered. "You didn't let me ignore her." He didn't move, just blinked slowly, content. Older now, a little slower, but still alert, still listening. Frank joined her, a folded flag in his hands. "This one was sent anonymously," he said. "Navy markings. Someone out there thought she deserved it." Ellie took the flag and placed it gently beside the pedestal. "She does," Frank exhaled. "You ready for what comes next?" Ellie stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "No," he smiled. "Good. That means you're still human." They walked through the trees together. Past reporters asking quiet questions, past grieving mothers embracing for the first time, past a young boy holding a sign that read, "My sister mattered." Back at the cabin, Hawk was already monitoring fallout. 37 officials had resigned. 14 were under investigation. A former Horizon 1 contractor had turned state's witness. A congressional hearing was scheduled for the following month. Public, transparent, televised. But it wasn't enough. Not for Ellie, not yet. She sat at the table with Frank and Hawk, sliding open a folder filled with names still not accounted for, faces, cases, graves not yet found. "There's more out there," she said. "Other nodes, other victims." Frank nodded. "And people still protecting them." Hawk tapped his screen. Then we build something permanent. They spent the next week working day and night. Frank contacted veterans from his old network. Hawk recruited ethical coders and former analysts. Ellie made calls to survivor groups, sheriffs, advocacy organizations. What began as a ragtag mission was becoming a structure. They named it Project Echo. Its mission, to track and expose hidden operations like Horizon 1, to identify systemic abuse buried under national security, to ensure silence never swallowed the truth again. They launched it quietly with no press, but the world noticed anyway, and soon stories started to come in. Emails, tips, evidence. The dam had broken. One night, Ellie walked out to the porch with Ranger and looked up at the stars. The woods beyond were peaceful, wrapped in soft wind and distant owl calls. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memory, of resistance, of voices that had finally been heard. She sat on the steps, pulled Ranger close and whispered, "We're not done, are we?" He tilted his head, then barked, once, sharply, echoing through the trees like a reminder. Ellie smiled. "No," she said, "we're just beginning." The committee room in Washington, D.C. was colder than the forest had ever been. Wood-paneled walls, high ceilings, flags positioned with geometric precision, the illusion of order in a place where, for years, disorder had thrived in silence. Reporters crowded into the back row, cameras like unblinking eyes. Rows of seats were filled with aides, activists, officials, and parents holding framed photos like shields. The energy was brittle, tight. Ellie sat alone at the front, facing the Senate subcommittee on domestic oversight. Behind her sat Frank, stone-faced in a plain suit, and Hawk, tie crooked, eyes darting from face to face. Lena, the girl they rescued from the facility, sat beside a social worker, thin but steadier now. She hadn't let go of the small wooden carving Ranger had given her, a worn pine cone he'd carried to her in the cabin after she woke from her first nightmare. Ellie rested her palms on the table in front of her. No notes, no documents, just presence. The chairwoman cleared her throat into the microphone. "Ms. Monroe, we're ready." Ellie looked straight ahead, locking eyes with the senators who had funded the pain she was about to name. Some flinched. Others leaned back. A few, too few, sat forward. "My name is Ellie Monroe," she began. "I'm a police officer in Pine Brook, Oregon. I'm not a politician. I'm not a soldier. I'm not trained in intelligence or foreign operations. I started all this because a dog wouldn't stop barking at a patch of forest." She paused, letting the silence settle. "That day we found the body of a girl. Her name was Emma Winslow. She'd been missing for over a year. She was 16, smart, kind. She died in the woods, alone, because a system designed to protect people like her was too busy protecting itself." Murmurs rippled through the room. "We thought it was an isolated incident, but it wasn't. What we found, what we uncovered, was a decades-long, multi-agency operation known as Horizon 1, hidden beneath budget codes, sanitized through language like resilience testing and domestic readiness. It wasn't readiness, it was cruelty, it was abuse." She reached into her coat and placed a worn object on the table, a medallion, dulled and scarred, the symbol almost unrecognizable now from the soil and blood it had touched. "They left this with her, like a signature, like they wanted us to know." A senator leaned forward. "Ms. Monroe, are you implying that this operation was sanctioned at the highest levels of government?" She didn't blink. "I'm not implying. I'm confirming. The files were in your own servers. The witnesses worked in your own facilities. The victims were American citizens, children, experimented on by contractors, soldiers, doctors, all under the protection of classified authority." The senator cleared his throat. "This is still an ongoing investigation." Ellie leaned in slightly. "I know, that's why I'm here. Because if this hearing doesn't result in convictions, closures, and structural reform, Then this wasn't an investigation. It was damage control. Someone in the back stood, a woman holding a photo of a boy in a baseball uniform. "My son disappeared in 2012, she said, voice trembling. "They told me he ran away, but the name you just said, Horizon 1, that was on the last letter he sent me." Security moved toward her, but Ellie turned in her seat. "It's okay," she said. "Let her speak." Others stood too, one by one, fathers, sisters, teachers, neighbors. The room no longer belonged to the committee. It belonged to the ones who had waited too long to be heard. The chairwoman banged her gavel. "Order!" Ellie turned back to the microphone. "You can silence them now, but they'll be back tomorrow and the next day and the next, until this government learns that secrecy is not security, that silence is not patriotism." Ranger barked from the hallway, once sharp, echoing. Everyone turned. The chairwoman stared at Ellie. "Is that your dog?" Ellie nodded. "That's Ranger. He found Emma. He was the first one who listened." There was a pause. Then unexpectedly, the room applauded. Not a roar, not a frenzy, just a steady rhythm of hands clapping for the girl buried beneath the pines, for the files, for the medallion, for the truth, for the dog. Later, outside, the sky was overcast, the air crisp with the edge of spring. Ellie stood on the Capitol steps, watching Ranger sniff the wind. A reporter approached her cautiously. "Officer Monroe, what's next?" She turned. "We keep going. Will you stay involved in Project Echo?" "I'll stay until it doesn't need me anymore." "Why you?" the reporter asked. "Why not someone else?" Ellie looked down at Ranger, and then out across the city. "Because I was there when the dead called out, and I answered." Frank stepped beside her. "We've got a meeting with Homeland next." Hawk joined them, holding a tablet. "And 2 states want to open their own investigations. Plus, there's talk of a national registry for covert program accountability. Not perfect, but a start." Ellie nodded. "Then we follow through." They walked down the steps together, past the cameras, past the people holding signs, past the ghosts they carried. Lena waited at the car, quiet but smiling. Ellie opened the door. Ranger jumped in. The world had changed. Not fully. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, the forest wasn't just watching. It was being heard. The cabin in Oregon had changed. What once was a temporary shelter had become something closer to sacred ground. A place where stories were gathered, where broken survivors walked in with questions and left with names, faces, and the understanding that they hadn't imagined their pain. It wasn't grand. No gates, no guards, no polished floors. Just wood, stone, and walls lined with files that refused to stay buried. Ellie stood on the porch at dawn, watching fog lift from the tree line. The early light filtered through the pines like forgiveness. It was the first morning in weeks she hadn't woken to a breaking alert or a coded threat. But the stillness didn't comfort her. It challenged her. Inside, Hawk was sprawled across the couch, headphones crooked, eyes half open as he muttered into a microphone for a podcast being streamed anonymously under a new title. Echo Source. Frank, predictably, was already at the map wall, plotting intersections between defense budgets and shell corporations. The pace hadn't slowed since the hearings. It had accelerated, because something strange had begun to happen. Former operatives from Horizon 1, some long thought dead, others presumed complicit, had started to come forward, not out of guilt, not entirely, but because of her. They saw Ellie's testimony. They watched Ranger rest his head on her boot while she named each phase of the operation with unwavering calm. And something inside them cracked. She didn't see herself as a symbol. She didn't want to be. But the quiet confessionals were mounting. 3 last week, 2 more this morning. Hawk catalogued each one with guarded optimism, watching for lies, for planted misinformation. But so far, the stories matched. Almost too well. They were disposable too, Frank muttered, marking a red X over a new name. Most of these guys were trained, used, then threatened into silence. Their NDAs were backed by the threat of blacklisting or worse. Ellie rubbed her eyes. "You think they deserve a platform?" "I think they deserve to be held accountable," Frank said, but accountability starts with truth. One of the testimonies that came in overnight was from a man named Isaac Norrin, once a logistics handler stationed in Arizona. He described shipments of non-compliant subjects, the language used to avoid saying children. He said he kept a notebook, names, dates, drop points. They found it buried behind a false panel in his trailer. 32 names, 9 confirmed matches with known missing persons cases. Hawk was processing it when the front door opened without warning. Lena stepped inside. She'd grown. It hadn't been that long, but Ellie noticed it in her posture, the way she didn't flinch when the floorboards creaked. She wore a denim jacket and carried a folder under one arm. "I got it," she said. She walking straight to Ellie. "What's this?" Ellie asked. "Her," Lena whispered. "The girl in the next room when I was there. Subject 43. She sang when they shocked her." I never forgot her voice. Inside the folder was a school photo. Name, Darla Chen. Missing since 2016. San Jose, California. Age at disappearance. 12. Ellie felt a familiar ache bloom in her chest. "They said she was dead," Lena said. "I heard the guards say it, but I don't believe it." "We'll look," Ellie said. "We'll make sure." Lena nodded and walked to Ranger, who greeted her with a gentle nudge. Across the country, memorials were rising in unexpected places. An abandoned train depot in Illinois had been converted into a gallery of recovered evidence. Sketches, recordings, name tags once worn by subjects. In Tennessee, a retired sheriff opened a public database of every cold case his department had misclassified during his tenure. He called it a penance. But there was still resistance. Private contractors began filing lawsuits against Project Echo, claiming defamation. A smear campaign began online, suggesting Ellie was an operative herself, sent to dismantle legitimate defense programs. Hawk traced those campaigns to a lobbying firm tied to Horizon One's last known financier. "It's a dying system," Frank said, "and dying systems fight hardest before they collapse." Ellie sat at the dining table with Lena, spreading out files of unidentified remains. "You sure she had a scar under her chin?" Lena nodded. "She told me it was from falling off her bike." One of the files matched. "Unidentified Jane Doe from Montana, 2017. Scar under chin. Approximate age, 12 to 13. DNA analysis pending." Ellie stared at the page. Sometimes closure came slow. Sometimes it came soaked in rage. But this was something else. This was rebuilding. That night a storm rolled in, drenching the cabin in wind and rain. The trees moaned under pressure, and thunder rolled low and long like a warning in the distance. Ellie stood by the window, watching the flicker of lightning across the valley. Frank joined her with 2 mugs of coffee. "New drop tonight," he said. "Another operative, Northern California, wants to talk." "Wants to extractions, 2014. Ellie nodded, taking the mug. "We'll meet him." Frank hesitated. "You ever think about stepping back?" She looked out the window. "Sometimes. Then I remember Emma and Lena and the others who never got that chance." Frank didn't press her. He didn't need to. They stood together in silence, watching the storm. Inside, Hawk's podcast played quietly, an anonymous voice reading a transcript. "We called it resilience, but it wasn't. It was submission. We took kids who trusted us and turned them into numbers. And when we were done, we buried the evidence in forests, until someone finally said no." Ellie closed her eyes and breathed deep. There was still so much to uncover. But tonight, for a few hours, she let herself feel the storm, not as a threat, but as a cleansing. The town hall was old, with cracked wooden floors and lights that buzzed faintly overhead, as if reluctant to stay lit. Folding chairs lined the walls, the windows fogged from breath and cold, and coffee brewed on a small table no one touched. The people inside weren't there for comfort. They were there because they had nothing left to lose, and maybe for the first time something to say. Ellie sat near the back, not as a speaker, not as a cop. Just a witness. Frank stood by the wall, Arms crossed, watching the door like an old habit, Hawk had set up the audio feed discreetly, recording every word, not to broadcast, but to archive, to preserve the impossible moment unfolding in front of them. On one side of the room sat the parents of victims, on the other former Horizon 1 operatives. There were no security details, no legal advisors, no cameras, just grief and silence and history crashing into itself. A woman in her 60s stood first. Her voice cracked before she even began. "My daughter's name was Evelyn. She was 10. You said she was physiologically ideal. That's what the file called her. Ideal." Across the room, a man in his 40s lowered his head. "I read that file. I didn't write it, but I didn't stop it either." "Why didn't you?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Because I was afraid, and because I wanted to believe it wasn't real, that someone above me knew what they were doing, that we weren't monsters." Someone else spoke. "You were." The man nodded. "I know." There was a pause. Then a father stood, holding a photo of a boy with dark eyes and a bright smile. "I hate you. I want you to know that. I still hate you. But if I don't say it here, if I don't say it now, I'm going to die with it." The man he stared at didn't speak. He just cried. No excuses, no deflection, just tears. It was the first moment in weeks that caught Ellie off guard, not because of its intensity, but because of its simplicity. There were no speeches, no righteous declarations, just raw truth in a room that had never been meant to exist. Forgiveness didn't come like a wave. It came like a breath. A man crossed the aisle, another followed, hands were shaken, some were slapped away. But the wall, for the first time, cracked. And through that crack, something else stepped in. Not healing, not yet, but a beginning. The wind carried laughter now. It drifted through the pines where once there had been only silence and loss. Children ran along the new path, chasing each other between wooden markers carved with names: Emma, Mason, Tara, and so many others. Not grave markers, not exactly. Memorials. Each one placed where a body had been recovered, each one facing the sunlight. Ellie stood at the entrance, hand resting gently on Ranger's head. He sat proudly beside the new statue, bronze, life-size, shaped from photographs and memory. A shepherd mid-bark, paw raised toward a tree. At the base of the statue, the inscription read, "He listened when no one else did." It had been Frank's idea. Hawk helped raise the funds. Survivors and families came from across the country to place small tokens beneath it. Collars, notes, drawings. Lena left a pine cone, worn smooth from months of carrying it in her jacket pocket. A woman approached Ellie, holding a photo of a boy with dimples. She said nothing, just reached out and squeezed Ellie's hand. Ellie squeezed back. Somehow, in the middle of all this, amid all the wreckage, the blood, the buried truth, a forest had become a monument. Not to death, but to voice, to memory, to something no longer hidden. And for the first time, Ellie didn't feel like she was walking through ghosts. She was walking with them. Years passed, not quickly, not painlessly, but steadily. Ellie now taught at Quantico ethics and field conduct. Her lectures were quiet, deliberate, never self-referential. She didn't speak about Horizon 1 unless asked, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of graves, not glory. Every cadet listened, not out of fear, but respect. She wasn't a myth, she was real, and she'd walked through the worst of what they swore to prevent. Ranger, older now, mostly slept under her desk. His muzzle grey, eyes cloudy, but his ears still twitched when someone raised their voice too sharply. Every trainee learned quickly. If Ranger stirred, you were off track. One afternoon, as class dismissed, a young recruit lingered, nervous, curious. "Ma'am," he asked, "if you could go back, would you do it again?" Ellie looked down at Ranger. He didn't move, but his tail tapped once against the floor. She smiled faintly. "I never had a choice," she said. "The dead were calling. And Ranger, he never let me ignore them." Outside, a breeze stirred through the courtyard. It didn't carry silence anymore, it carried names, and none of them would ever be forgotten again.